Jeremy from jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you enjoy these videos, would like bonus live streams twice a month where we do deep dives into some of the best art books around, you can become a Patreon subscriber for as little as $2 a month. You also get access to a Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share art talk, works in progress, tips, feedback, just general online experience, but more deep inside the studio. You can head on over there, and you also get access to an online archive of my comics. You can read them online. Little as $2 a month at patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you would like to get a free digital sketchbook delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. I'll forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. It's a standalone book. You can also pick up my most recent project, Morning Star. It is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter. There's page layouts, script excerpts, thumbnails, character designs, photo reference. I basically show you how I put the entire book together. And if you go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, there are book flip-throughs of all of those books. You can see what's inside before you pick them up. So I would like to wish all the moms out there happy Mother's Day. And all of you should definitely call your moms, visit your moms, tell them you love them. So happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. And what am I up to? Well, turns out this week I did actually make some progress on the revised Morningstar Volume 2 cover art. So got in, painted some of the skin tones, some of the highlights and shadows, scales on the snake. A lot of the techniques that I've been using on the Medusa pieces. Having a chance to work those in here. So I still need to finish sort of the details on the gun, add a little bit of lighting to the clothing, and then add some environmental light. A little bit of a glow around him, some of that light bleeding onto his clothes and the wings. Yeah, and I also need to do the wings. Although the wings probably aren't going to have too much detail on them. It's really just I don't want to break up the mass that the wings are making. So let's see here. And just grab the selection that I have of the snake. And go to these lights. Let me pick a little. Take this color and maybe make it a little bit pinkish. And normally I don't just go up and down. I usually will try to make something more saturated, but making this more saturated will push it into the reds, which I don't want it to do. Let me make sure I'm on the right brush. So I'm just trying to take the areas that are facing towards the light. And this isn't a highlight. I'll probably come in with a slightly whiter pink and just put little dots of highlight in this thing. maybe to give it sort of a little glistening feel on the inside of the mouth. Oh, whoop. For some reason, it lost the selection. Let me bring that back. I mean, to be honest, I don't really need the selection because I'm painting in a localized area. And usually the selection is more of if I'm painting, let's say, the skin or the shadows, and they're going to be rubbing up against the area where I'm painting. Whoops, let me deselect that. If the area I'm painting is rubbing up right against another area where it's easy for me to make strokes that will end up in the wrong part of the figure, like for instance, painting shadows on his pecs being right next to where the body of the snake is, that's an area where I would want to mask it. Just keep those two areas separate. But for this, I don't think I'm really going to go outside of the area where I'm painting right now, so it's fine. Oops. Eraser in here. There's a very slight shadow in this area, and I want to have like a little dot of light inside of that. So mostly this light area isn't necessarily like a huge, it's not like a light like, oh, it's being hit by a strong light source. It's more just this area is more raised, more pronounced. Zoom back out, get a wider look at it. It'll be interesting to see how this plays against the cover for Volume 1, because my painting style has become chunkier. I don't really do a lot of smooth blends and a painterly look. Everything I'm doing, it's also, it actually feels a lot more like kind of like the plastic shading of 90s comics, in that I'm not really blending the lights and darks. I'm just doing them with kind of like cells, almost like animation cells. My buddy Carl Alstetter kind of taught me that they called the style of the 90s kind of the cut gradient, where you would create a selection and you would have a hard edge at one side, but then have a gradient stroking down the light. And mine is just sort of like cut, no cut gradient. So let me do a little bit more. This is just going to be little dots of highlight here. And even these highlights aren't going to be pure white. And it's something I have to think about when I move to doing the wings, is maybe bringing the wings down from the white that they're in to something just a little bit grayer. Because really, for pure white, you really want to save that for like light sources and reflections of light sources. Because it really, white really stands out, really prominent. Doesn't mean you have to use it purely for light sources, but you should make sure that if you are using it for something that isn't a light source, it's a conscious choice and you're doing it for a reason. For instance, I might well go pure white with the fangs because the fangs are bones and bones are white. But yeah, I was looking at pictures online of snake fangs, and the ones that I do see are white, but that's also because they're like pictures of skeletons. When you actually look at them inside a snake's mouth, I expected them to be yellower like human teeth, but actually what I saw in photos in nature is that snake fangs looked a little bit like a bluish tinge or a bluish cast to them. I don't know, maybe they're gargling with cool mint scope. So just these little dots here of white give it a sense of like glistening. The inside of the mouth is wet. I'm giving it that wet organic feel. And I think that's probably enough because I don't want to over detail this. Too much detail and it starts fighting with the rest of the piece. There's already so much going on between the main figure, his face, the detail of his gun, the clothes detail. It's one of the reasons why I intentionally wanted to do the scales in color instead of doing them in the line art. Because if I turn this off real quick and you see just flat serpent, it kind of gives you a little bit of breathing space between all the detail of the figure work, the line work. And by doing the scales in the color, it gives you that sense of detail, but it's not competing the way that it might if, the way I think it definitely would if I were to just draw all those scales in there in ink. And, this comes from having done a variety of pieces and trying different executions for drawing snakes for all of the Medusa pieces that I've done. And, I found if I'm going to do something and it's exclusively black and white, then yeah, I will draw the scales in and I'll use pretty much the same technique I'm using here, where I'm just using kind of curved hatching, but in chunky marks to indicate the scales. But if I know I'm going to be working in color, I will definitely choose to leave the scales in color. And who knows, maybe the next time I do a black and white Medusa piece, I will do the scales in a wash, maybe do an ink wash or a gray paint to capture that same effect. Something for me to think about in the future. So anyway, I think that I will paint the scales in here, and I'm trying to decide if I want to go with this cool blue. I think what I'll do is I like to start by picking the color that I'm working from. So I'm picking the gray that I already have down as that base. Then I'm going to shift the color wheel to a blue. And then from here, this way I can kind of see the contrast between the color I had. Well, unfortunately, it's still remembering that I had a, let's see what happens if I leave that and then like make that the color. Will it still? Okay, see, this is what I wanted. I wanted it to take the color that I have now and in comparison say, all right, how blue is this getting? So this little thing that I have my mouse over is showing me the difference between my current color and the color that it will be when I release it. So this way I can see how much blue I'm adding and how much light I'm adding. And I want to add just enough for it to kind of like, I want to add just enough for you to be able to see the difference, but not enough that it's high contrast. And I think right there is good. And now also because the fangs are against the edge one of the fangs is against the edge of a selection, I'm going to go, meaning the entire snake, because I don't have the fangs as its own selection, but I have the entire snake as a selection. This is an area where I will go in and grab my my selection again so that I can paint in here without having to focus too much on staying inside the line. And this will also be interesting because this gray is a cool color. It's going to contrast to the warms of the sky and the environment. So I need to keep that in mind when I come in here and I add my lights. I actually probably need to push my lights not to the edge of the fang, but more towards the middle of the fang, because there's going to be a whole other light on the very edge of it that's coming from the environment. I'm going to come in there with the warm environmental colors. I'm going to do a whole pass where I just add environmental colors into the figure. That's going to be sort of the last stage of this piece. And I will also tell you that experimentation to me is important. I don't feel like I have mastered color by any means. And I think that there's definitely a world in which I could have taken this entire figure, and the way that the sky is reds and oranges and the ground is like desaturated blues, I could have just colored the figure with a gradient from reds to desaturated blues from top to bottom. Like the whole figure could have just been a gradient of that, and then come in and sort of work from monochromatic to chromatic, meaning going for letting the local color, or figure out what the version of the local color would be within that gradient. That's definitely an approach to take to doing a piece like this. And it's not a matter of one being right or wrong. It's just a matter of the effect that you want. But I mention it because I'm not going to redo this whole piece or do this piece in that approach. But I'm very aware that in other pieces, I might decide, you know what? I'm going to go full monochromatic on this thing. In fact, it might be a shortcut to create a layer on top, fill that with that environmental color, and then erase out or mask out areas where I don't want it to show through. That's something that is worth trying only because I think I could do it fairly quickly. I do have a habit of, when I come up with these ideas or alternate takes or approaches, I think of things that are like, oh, I basically just created a whole new illustration for myself, or I've got to do multiple passes in order to get the effect that I want. This is something that it's real quick. Just create a new layer, fill, gradient. Not that Procreate has a gradient tool, but I could paint in that transition fairly quickly. Really large, soft brush. What I'll probably do is really large, soft brush, orange, and then, or red, and then just paint the next range of colors on top of that. From that, have the red go to orange to yellow, a little bit of a weird in terms of it getting green in the middle. And then to the blues. Although, what would probably be smarter is have it go to gray and then from warms to grays to blues instead of going to greens, because I can't remember who it was who showed me this. It might have been the Draw Mix Paint YouTube channel, but someone was talking about color. Could have been Marco Bucci, because he talks a lot about color. And I've watched a lot of his videos to help learn things about color that I am particularly weak at. But if I bring up the color wheel with here, if you're trying to go from orange to blue, you're thinking, well, I have to go from orange to red to magenta to dark blue to light blue. And you're trying to say, well, what's the quickest way there? And the quickest way is not around the color wheel. It's through the middle. It's just have the color go to gray and then go from gray to the color on the opposite side of the color wheel. That's actually the most direct visual route. And if you have something go from color to gray to color on the opposite side of the color wheel, that actually works as a transition, as opposed to having to go all the way around. So who knows? Maybe I'll just put a big gray in there and then just start at one end going oranges, reds and oranges, the other end, the blues and cool colors. And, we'll see. We will see. Let me undo a couple of these strokes. There's a little bit in here with the snake fangs that I don't like. There's like one little piece in here that I'm like, I don't like that. It's in the wrong spot. Which, yeah, this is my perfectionist side coming out again. And I always think it's funny to mention or to think of myself as a perfectionist because of the fact that, in my mind, much of what I do is so imperfect. I think it's ridiculous to call myself a perfectionist. But let's see. Chris is in the chat. Says looks good. Thank you, Chris. Making some progress here. I've been working on this piece for on and off for the past couple of weeks. It's a new cover for an existing book, an existing graphic novel that I published. And actually, it's taking the exact cover and just doing it in a new angle. So in the original cover, you were looking more at this character from a profile with his arm outstretched to the left, holding his gun, still with a serpent wrapped around him. But it just didn't feel, I don't know, as dynamic as I wanted. And I was looking at the cover for the first volume, and it has a much more of an intimate portraiture feel to it. And I thought, well, what if I just try to do the cover I had painted, but from the angle that the first cover was from? And I am pretty happy with the results. But yeah, I appreciate the feedback. Let's see here. Now with the hat, I'm kind of feeling like I don't know if I really want to add too much lighting. Well, like the hat and the clothing in general. I almost feel like for that one, I want to limit the lights to just environmental light. But these other, with the skin and the snake, I've intentionally put in lighting that has sort of like a secondary light besides the sky that's sort of to the front right of the figure. But I feel like for the clothes, maybe I don't want them hit by too much of a light source. Or honestly, maybe the shadow that I have indicating that lighting direction is probably enough. Let's do the gun. The gun needs its due. And this is going to be tricky because the gun is metallic. So it's going to have not just the lighting of the environment, but it's just, it's high. Metal is reflective. So it's going to pick up more of the lighting. So whatever lighting I put on this, I have to be aware that it's going to get overpowered by whatever lighting I added the environmental pass. If I were smart, I would have lit the replica gun I have of this reference and taken a photo of it with a light coming from the angle that I have in this piece. But no, I'm just going to wing it. And I say that like, oh, I say that like my point is I'm acknowledging that winging it is not a great idea. Don't do what I do. I'm looking at this and every part of my brain is screaming, no, go get lighting reference. And if I weren't here live with you guys right now, I would stop, go, take up my replica gun, set this in this position, and put a lamp shining on it from this angle and photograph it, because that's the right way to get lighting reference. It's trying to make it up out of your head is something that is reserved for somebody who's far more experienced than I am. And yes, I've been making art for, a couple decades now, but my grasp of most of my pursuits have been about the actual storytelling in comics. So, sequential storytelling and, drawing, setting up angles, and working on improving my just draftsmanship, just general anatomy and drawing. My studying of lighting and color is really honestly just kind of it's just sort of starting now, or at least I feel like I'm starting. I've been learning the entire time of my life I've been making pictures, but I think I'm only starting to study color more seriously now as I've been using more reference in pieces. But yeah, when in doubt, get reference. And I'll tell you that this gun is dark. I kind of want to make it lighter simply because I want to show off the detail of the gun, which it's not a perfect Navy Colt revolver. I've definitely seen people draw far better ones. But definitely there is an arrogance or a pride to wanting to take this thing that I drew and show off. Say, look, I can draw guns. Because to be honest, I'm not a great gun artist. Like there's some people who just draw fantastic weapons and tech and mech. But I'm going to lighten this up a bit. Just with hue saturation. I don't want to light it too much because I'm going to gray down the wings. So I was saying earlier, I don't want them to be super like stark white. And even though I am tempted to go in here and add little bits of lighting detail on the details of the gun, I actually think that's something that's going to read better with the environmental light. I will come in that's an idea. I was going to go in and add just a little bit of light on these bolts just to give them a little bit of contrast. But instead, what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to do the opposite, which is I'm going to select my shadow layer, and I'm going to go to a darker gray, almost like the gray that I started with, this base gray, and just go a little bit darker. Instead of adding lights, I'm going to add shadows. It's all about contrast. You can make something feel brighter by adding a contrasting color or tone. A little bit of contrast here. All right. A little bit of shadow in here, and I'm going to need to erase a little bit of that light that's creeping in to the barrel of the gun there. A little bit of that. Let's see here. Chris is in the chat. He says, I don't have a stylus. So if you work digitally, are you just using a mouse to kind of select everything and color that way? Or do you work traditionally? Let's see here. At this point, I'm not really doing any specific things. I'm just looking at the gun and ask myself if there's anything I want to clean up or change before moving on. And actually looking at this, I feel like some of those shadows I put in there are breaking up the gun a little bit. And what I mean by that is it had sort of a unified feel to it. It felt very solid. I feel like some of these shadows are kind of breaking up that solidity, making it feel like it's a little bit more broken into pieces, which I don't want. So I'm actually going to come in here and take those out now. Sometimes you do that. You'll do something, and whether you're working digital or traditional, you'll paint something in thinking, oh, great, it's going to add this level of detail. And then you look at it and you're like, nope, that messed it up. Got to take that out. Happens all the time. I mean, hell, even when inking comic books, I mean, that's what we got whiteout and pro white paint for. Let's see here. So Chris says, I'm working traditionally, doing some figure drawings. Well, figure drawings, I take figure drawing classes regularly. I greatly credit it for one of the biggest improvements in my drawing abilities. For many years, I was taking figure drawing classes at the Animation Guild in Burbank. I still study with one of the instructors over there, Carl Ganas. He teaches classes online, and I study that way. But yeah, doing figure studies. It shows me how much I think I know compared to how much I really know, which often there's a much larger gap than I would like. But, you can't fix problems if you're not aware that they exist. So do you take figure drawing classes, Chris? Do you study anywhere? Are you just working from books or working from photos? Let's see. Add a little bit of shadow to these boots, and then I think I'm going to move on to the wings. Whew. Pardon me. All right. Trim on my shadow layer. All right, that color does not work for me because it's just blending in with the existing shadow color that's above. Let me see what happens if I can move this to a cooler color because it's already pretty gray. Let's move this down into almost the purples. So you guys, I don't know how well you can see this color difference, but now it's sort of a purple gray versus a warm gray. And the real question is just whether it's enough that when I look at it from a distance, it feels like, oh, this is a different surface, it's a different material versus the pants. To me, it works. And in fact, this is going to make me go back up into the hat and the gun and the belt. Not the gun, the hat and this holster and the belt is what I meant. Interesting. Interesting. For some reason, I never included that part of the holster in the selection for my my belt selection. So let's just turn off the selection altogether. Get in here and, oh wait, no, I understand now. I was trying to indicate that that's a different material. So this will actually come in handy. Sometimes I'm drawing and I have to literally think back, like, all right, what was I thinking when I drew this piece or that piece? Why did I do that? So I was trying to indicate that the holster is a separate material from the pants, but that little strap that's around the midpoint and at the base of the, not the base, but at the bottom of the holster, that's a different material which has similar colors to the pants, even if it's not the same material. So as I'm coming in here and adding these purple cools, I'm just adding it to this part of the holster. But that little wrap that's going around the middle, I'm going to leave that as is. And maybe I'll throw a little shadow here in the middle of the belt. So this is the part of working on a piece that can be really hard for people because it's hard for me too. Finishing a piece, I think, is one of the most challenging things because you keep looking at it and saying, well, what does it take to get this over the finish line? What more is missing? And you don't want to nitpick to the point that you ruin, that you make the piece stiff and lose the energy of it, but you also don't want to leave it looking raw and unfinished. Although I, as an artist, tend to be somebody who underfinishes rather than overfinishes a piece. And that's neither meant to praise or damn my approach. It's just an acknowledgement that that's where my weaknesses or my visual prejudices lie. They lie in the direction of looser, sketchier, unfinished versus something that's overworked. A lot of zooming in and then zooming out and looking at the whole thing to see how it feels. All right. Let me bring down the wings a little bit. Not a ton. I just want them to be a little bit grayer. Bring the saturation from a pure white down. Not necessarily as dark as like a pigeon wing. Still want them to be white, just not super bright white. And then given the fact that I'm going to paint some shadows into this, and then I'm going to paint environmental colors on top of that, that's probably enough. And the nice thing about working digital is I can always come back and tweak it if I need to. So now let's go back up to my shadow layer. From here, I'm going to add some cool colors because all the environmental light is going to be, well, the environmental light is going to be mostly warm, but then it's going to be cool colors towards the bottom because that's what's going to be reflected. You know, the environment on the lower half is warm. The environment on the upper half is, the environment on the lower half is cool, whereas on the upper half it's warm. So we'll see. So double check them on the shadow layer again. Let's move this around to the cool side. And I don't want to get too saturated because shadows also tend to be desaturated. You know, saturation comes from light. So I do want it to have a bluish cast. I don't want it to get out of control. And I also don't want to go too dark, at least not in this first pass. We'll see how it looks. I may paint this in there and say, no, it needs more contrast. But let's see. There are people who have a very clear vision in their head and know what they want each stroke to be. But for me, a lot of it is putting down marks or tones and just seeing if they work. Let's see here. So Chris asks, who is this guy you study figure drawings from? His name is Carl Ganas, and I'm going to put it, his spelling, it's, well, you're not here. Let me just. Create. New layer. Well, that's not going to work. Deselect. So his name is Carl with a K. Gnass. And if you look him up, Chris, on YouTube, you'll see that he has a bunch of videos on his own channel. And a lot of them show sort of the basics of his approach and his technique. And then he has a website called figuredrawingschool.com. And that's where you can sign up for his classes. And actually, I think the classes for his summer semester are up already. So if you want to hop in, that's a good place to take a look. I've taken most of his classes at some point or the other. He has classes on, a class on fundamentals. He has a class that's, I think he calls it active anatomy, but it's the difference between long pose versus short pose. And, you know, the longer poses has more rendering, more anatomy. The fundamentals class is a lot more on gesture and volume and structure. There's a class on drawing heads, hands, and feet, which I usually try to take that at least once a year, because I feel like I'm not a portrait artist. And I always feel like all of those things, heads, hands, and feet, I always need work on improving those. He also has a class on costume and drapery. Then he's got a few other classes, but yeah, I usually just kind of rotate through those at different times of the year. So if you're looking to take classes online, he's a good guy to study with. I have learned a tremendous amount. I would say a huge amount of my drawing ability compared to where I was when I started studying with him. I still feel like I have a long way to go, but studying with him has made a huge difference in my my drawing ability. Let's see here. Go back to that wing selection. And I don't really know why, but I tend to prefer to color opaquely instead of drawing with the brush on a low opacity, like using a darker gray, blue gray, and then turning the opacity down to 20%, which is how I think most of the coloring I did in the past was more like that. Whereas in this, I'm just picking a color and I want it to be a cool gray. I pick the cool gray and I paint with the cool gray. And a lot of these things are not things that I'm like, this is the way to do it. It's, as I mentioned, I think earlier, I still feel like my entire approach to making pictures is an evolving thing. I'm constantly trying new approaches, rethinking how I've done things in the past, trying to add new tools to my my visual toolbox. Let's see here. Let's see here. So, Chris, is there a particular field of art that you're interested in? Are you studying figure drawing because you just enjoy doing figure work? Are you interested in illustration, game design, comics, animation? What kind of stuff are you into? Because I got into studying figure drawing simply because I wanted to make better comics. But now, after having studied it for so many years, I really love just studying the figure, drawing the figure just for the sake of drawing the figure. To the point where if I couldn't do comics, I would probably be pretty happy just doing figure studies, because I feel like there's so much to learn and master that I'm never going to be at a point where I'm like, oh, I've got it all figured out. Like, there will always be new mysteries that I will be chasing and exploring, and I'm still working on mastering the fundamentals. And there's a big difference between being able to draw the fundamentals versus having them mastered. So I can do drawings that are fundamentally sound, but if I stop paying attention for just a minute, or if I get lazy, my proportions get wonky, my sense of volume kind of flattens or gets mushy, and rendering still is not my strong suit, which probably relates to the fact that color is something that I still have a lot of work to do as well, because I think rendering and color kind of go hand in hand. I mean, you can do a very fully rendered black and white piece, but if you don't have rendering figured out, unless you're doing very flat graphic stylized color, that color is going to be affected by rendering as well. So if you can't render in black and white, you're not going to be able to render in color either. So let's see here. Yeah. Chris says comics, illustrations, and the figure. Yeah, they all go together hand in hand very well. It's funny. I was talking to a buddy of mine the other night, and we were talking about the fact that comics is one of those fields where it requires so many different disciplines, because there's the visual storytelling, the lighting, the pacing, the actual figure drawing, environmental drawing, anatomy, props, costume design. It's like everything that any artist would have to study. You kind of have to have a sense of all of them in order to do comics. It's pretty nuts. And yes, Chris agrees. Rendering is tricky. Yeah, I will say that again. It's tricky because to me, the premise is very simple. But just because the premise is simple, it doesn't mean that that's what's frustrating is you look at it and someone can explain it to you and you're like, yeah, I get it. And then you try and do it and it doesn't work. And then you go back and you look at what the principles were and you're like, okay, no, these are the principles. And then you try and do it and you're like, why is this not working? Because it's just a light source, a shadow, reflected light, like light source with a highlight, reflected shadow, half tones, just understanding where you're putting the lighting. And yes, rendering, when you get into rendering texture, it's like how does texture affect those properties? But rendering really to me is just lighting and how light is affected by the properties of whatever that object is. All right. So we are getting close to an hour here. Which means we will probably wrap up in the next 5 minutes or so. So if you have any questions you're thinking about or want to ask, feel free to ask them now. And for anyone watching the replay, you are more than welcome to leave comments, and I will try to get back to them in the comment section and possibly mention them during the next live stream. And Chris, just so you know, I usually am live streaming most Sundays, 11 a.m. Pacific time. And you are more than welcome to join me anytime. I'm usually just working on whatever illustration I'm working on. Usually I'm working on comic book pages, but after finishing my last comic, I've been really, really slow in writing the next one. So I haven't really jumped in on that one. Been treading water, just working on illustrations. But I will get there. I will get there. I don't want to rush the writing. And that's another thing. Like the longer I do this, the longer I make comics, the more each time I do something, I want it to get better. And I still recognize that I have a lot of growth in terms of making my art better. But having done a couple of graphic novels now, I really want the writing to make it worth, when you do a project and it takes, 3 to 5 years, you really got to make it worth it for yourself. You have to write something that you're not going to be bored by, because it's too easy to give up. It really is. When you're working on something this long, you can get to where you're just like, you know what, this just isn't worth it. I don't want to do it anymore. So that's the reason for me. It's not necessarily that I want to, or I believe that I can write a perfect story or a flawless story, but I have to write something that's interesting enough for me personally that I am going to want to do. I want to be as excited to draw page 100 as I am to draw page 1. And that takes some work. It definitely requires me to dig deeper than I have in the past. So on the writing side, I'm in the digging deeper phase. So this piece is not completely done because obviously I've got to do that environmental lighting. But I feel like I made a lot of progress. We're kind of entering the home stretch. I should zoom back out and look because it's very possible. It's going to say I could have put too much detail in the wings and come in and said, you know what, I need to erase all of that. I think it's working okay. I don't think it's too detailed. But I was definitely worried about inputting all of this this shadow in between each feather, that it would kind of like how when I was drawing the revolver, and it started ruining the sense of it being a solid mass because it had all these little dips of shadow and light. But I feel like the silhouette of the wings are strong enough that it's kind of holding the whole thing together. All right, I think we're just about ready to call this one for the day. I'll still keep working on it. To be honest, I probably will finish this during the week, but I'll show you guys the finished version on next week's live stream. Meanwhile, I'll have to figure out what I'll be working on going forward. And I'm looking at this now and I realize I kind of reversed this. These shadows should be on the underside. Let me fix that real quick. Let's see here. Chris says, can you show us some panels? I don't have any comic panels on here at the moment, but I think I might have layouts. Let me take a look. Go to the gallery. Let's see here. Well, I do have gray tones from the final issue of the comic that I'm doing the cover for is it's Lucifer's Fall from Heaven told as a Western. I've got a sequence here. One of the characters, the Archangel Michael, was thrown into a river, was shot up, thrown into a river. And this is a page where he's emerging from the river, like the surface is kind of still, but you see a little bit of bubbles from underneath. And he kind of bursts out of the water, healed and ready to get some payback. There's a sequence when basically Lucifer leads an invading army made up of rebel angels and demons that he's kind of like recruited. I don't have the dialogue on this because I add the dialogue separately. I had that in. I used to use Adobe Illustrator, but I switched to a program called Affinity Designer. But it's like it's a vector program that I use. So just draw the word balloons, add the text. Then let's see here. Chris asks, is this the same story? Yes, this is all from the final issue of Morningstar. And this is the first issue where I did all the gray tones on a tablet. It used to be that I did them on my desktop computer. So that's the reason why this is the only one that I have on this device. But if you actually want to see inside of the book, on the homepage of my YouTube channel, if you scroll down through the playlists, there's a playlist called Book Flip-Throughs. And you can look at the first issue of Morning Star, the first volume of Morning Star, the second volume, which has this issue that I'm showing you. This is a panel. It's a splash page of like a giant demon just kind of tearing through the town, along with all these other demons. Like here's one on the rooftop slashing, one of the angels. I don't know if I mentioned to you, the premise of the book is that it's Lucifer's fall from heaven, kind of like Paradise Lost, but it's told as a Western. So that's why heaven is a Western town, hence all the cowboys and cowboy hats. I realized if I didn't tell you that, you might be like, what the hell am I looking at? It's a little confusing. But that's the premise of the book. So here's a page. You've got like all these demons. You might have got angels on like rooftops trying to repel these invading demons. You've got like demons and angels flying, and they're like kind of dogfighting in the air around this big, massive, monster that's kind of tromping through the city, the town. Heaven is like a Western frontier town in the comic. But yeah, this is all from these pages that I'm showing you here. I'm picking random pages, but they're all from the same issue. So let's see here. It's a page where there's two angels, one who's one of the rebel angels, one that's stays with Michael, and the archangels that are defending heaven, and they're having a showdown on a roof. A little quick draw action there. So it's like a wide panel of them standing off. Her kind of like, look, we don't have to go down like this. It doesn't have to be this way. And the other one is like, yeah, it does. She draws on her. That is a very poor description of the dialogue that I have there. The dialogue is more related to things that have happened leading up to the conflict between these two. But she draws. The other one's faster, shoots her off of the roof. Then she falls, crashes to the ground. But yeah, so these are just some of the pages in that final issue of Morning Star. And if you want to see everything that came before that, like I said, check out the book flip through section of my YouTube playlists, and you can see what's inside the whole comic. Get a sense of that. All right. Yeah, so on that note, let's see. Chris says, I don't know if I'm ready to do all this stuff on my own yet. I don't even have any great ideas. All this inspiration might come, might not. Well, you know what? That's okay. You don't have to know. And, even though I personally like writing things that I draw, I will tell you that there are many, 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 many writers out there that are looking for collaborators. So if you're an artist and you're just like, I don't have an idea, I don't have a story, you could just post workouts online and you could just put in the comments of your or description of any of your artwork you share, I'm looking for a writer, I'm looking for a collaborator. Looking for a color. Maybe you're looking for somebody to color your work. I'm looking for a colorist to collaborate with. Many of the great comics in comics history are collaborations. Generally, the whole thing is broken down with penciler, inker, writer, colorist, letterer. I chose to learn all of those things because I'm a little bit of a control freak. I also think that it helps to understand the process better if you've done the thing yourself before working with others. And so you have an idea of what it takes. But part of it is also the fact that just being an independent artist, I'm not, looking to get a deal with Marvel or DC, that in the end, if I'm doing my own work, I need to be able to do all the things to bring it to publication. I mean, even with the color, I'm not the world's greatest colorist. As you saw with the pages I showed you, the interiors, I work black and white. It's only covers and standalone illustrations that I do color work in. So mostly I work in black and white. But even that's where I was mentioning about values and contrast. You still need to understand values in order to do a gray tone book, a black and white book. I mean, even if you're just doing pen and ink with no gray tones at all, you still need to understand value. But yeah, it doesn't have to all come at once. And even if you are eventually going to do your own ideas, they don't have to come all at once. Like I was telling you, I'm having trouble writing the next comic that I'm going to be doing. Sometimes you have ideas that come perfectly. Sometimes you don't. The best recommendation I can have for you is to just write a short story. Something's really, really short. Like an 8-page comic, a 12-page story, a single issue. But do something that is just you wanting to draw something that you think is cool. Or, maybe even you do something, instead of writing your own idea, you could just do an adaptation. Do like an old Greek myth, like the story of the flight of Icarus, or was it Perseus and the Minotaur? I forget who fought the Minotaur. But, like a Greek myth story. Aesop's fables, something that's in public domain. You just pick a very simple old story, and you don't even necessarily have to write it. You can just do the story. See, that's actually drawing a story with no dialogue, where you're just adapting it visually. That is a great exercise for teaching yourself how to do visual storytelling. So that's something else I'd recommend to you. And if you've never read it, I highly, highly, highly recommend the book Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. That is absolutely, without a doubt, one of the best books on the fundamentals and the process of making comic books. I really recommend that book. If you don't want to go out and buy it, hopefully they'll have it at your local library. If they do have it at your local library, it's probably you're going to have to put it on yourself on the wait list, because it's a book that I think gets checked out frequently. But it's a great book on just understanding. Well, it's literally Understanding Comics. It's the name of the book. But it's understanding the underpinnings of how visual storytelling in comics works. And to kind of give you a primer on what each aspect, the power of color, the power of lettering, the power of storytelling and pacing, and how, different ways to pace stories. There's places where they get into the difference between manga versus Western comics. All around, for anybody who is interested in making comics, I would say that's probably like your number one first stop is that book. And if you can't afford it, I would just say go buy a copy, because it's a book that you're going to read and reread throughout your career. All right. On that note, we're going to wrap up the live stream here, guys. So let's go back to the big screen. And again, definitely, if you like these videos, share them hit that share button, hit that like button, forward it to anyone who you think might enjoy these, who enjoys just hearing shop talk about art, comics, and the creative process. That's what I like to share with you guys. And if you want to do a deeper dive, we have a thing on our Patreon called Art Book Study Group. Twice a month, we do a deep dive where we sit down with a great educational art book. And we've been doing a long-running study on Walt Reed's The Figure, working through it page by page, doing studies from the book, just talking about it, about what the content of the book is. And you get that as a participant in Patreon. It's as little as $2 a month, gets you in the door. There's higher tiers for higher rewards. But we do the Art Book Study Group twice a month. In fact, it's coming up this Wednesday. It's going to be at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So we do that twice a month. Next, our book study group's coming up this Wednesday. You also get access to a digital archive online of my comics. You can read those. And you get access to a Patreon-exclusive Discord server where we share works in progress, art tools, tips, feedback, encouragement, and more. So, head on over to patreon.com/Jeremy. That's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical copies of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. It's a standalone book. You can also pick up my most recent comic book, Morning Star. It is Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8, the conclusion to the series. Both volumes have extensive back matter, script excerpts, photo reference, thumbnails, character designs, layouts, and more. I basically show you how I put the entire book together. And as I mentioned earlier, if you go to the homepage of my YouTube channel, scroll down to book flip-throughs. There's book flip-throughs of all those books. You can see what's inside before you buy. Okay, guys. Thank you again so much. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. I see Mercidian Merchant in the chat. I'm sorry. I just missed you. We're at the end of the stream. Please feel free to share your new character. You can tag me on Instagram if you want. Instagram handles in the video description, and I can take a look there. Unfortunately, we're wrapping up the stream, but they say I'll whisper it. All right. I look forward to seeing your new character. Take care, everybody. That's it for now. Go be creative.